Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing a personal story or a professional story, how you share that story matters. It colors how people perceive you, and it can affect your internal messages. So when you are conscious of the stories you're sharing and you make an intention, you set an intention for the story, think about what you want that person in front of you to think about, what you want them to do, or maybe how you want them to feel. And then when you share your story, you are so much more likely to truly connect with that person in front of you. Listeners, you're in for a treat today. I have Robin Hamilton on the call, and she reached out to me on email. And when I saw her profile, I thought, oh, absolutely, this woman has to be on this show. And you are so lucky. I am so lucky today, listeners. Just hang in because you're going to love this ride.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you. I feel like I'm the lucky one, and I genuinely do. I reached out to you because I cherry pick when I stumble upon podcast, and I had found, believe it or not, your podcast talking about your book. Your book, How You Tell Your Stories. It was a podcast just talking about what to expect when people read your book. And you had amazing stories. I was sucked in immediately about not only your band Spare Change, but you told the story about the Zadie bone, I think. And yeah,
My dad.
yeah, I loved that. But what really stuck with me was your message about how you tell your story. Everybody has a story, but so much of it is about framing. And when I say framing, I don't mean that in a superficial way. I mean, what is it that you highlight? And I think one of the things you said in that podcast is if you focus on the negative, then then you are going to be negative, and negativity is just going to come to you. But if you focus on the positive, the great things, even just moments of gratitude, that shifts. That is a shift, not only in your mindset, but also in your day to day. So I think what you do is great. And I love that.
Thank you. I sure appreciate hearing that. After 360 something episodes, as one of my friends said, why do you keep doing it? And I said, because I get this opportunity to talk to people and hear their stories and hold space for those stories. And I love that because I can be on a plane and meet somebody next to me and think, oh, they'd make such a great podcast guest.
Wow.
And then I have an excuse to contact them or they contact me. I've met so many interesting people, and I've interviewed a few celebrities, but those aren't the episodes that are really memorable for me.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, quick side story. I am right now in Roseville, California, just outside of Sacramento, visiting my mother. And when I knew I was going to be here, I looked up a woman that I interviewed on my podcast 5 years ago.
Wow.
I emailed her and asked her if she'd go to lunch with me. And we had lunch yesterday, and it was as if no time had passed. We have not been in touch. But that one episode was so memorable to me. It was about positive psychology and her experience. Her name is Courtney Ackerman. And she was in my first year, I think, of my podcast. And she studied psychology partly to address her own anxiety issues and found the frustration of studying only the things that go wrong to cause anxiety, and realized, why are we not celebrating and studying what goes right so that we can make those changes? Yeah, she's brilliant. So there's that. That's the other thing, is I learned so many different things. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure. But it also takes a lot of guts and thoughtfulness to not only start a podcast, but also to engage people in conversations and then to reach back out to someone after 5 years and say, I had such a great connection with you. And then the fact that they're willing to meet up with you again, I mean, wow.
That was pretty cool.
That is cool. That is cool. And kudos to you for 300 plus episodes.
It's been a journey.
Yeah.
So let's go to that first question I love to ask my guests at the
Yes.
beginning, because when I ask you to share something about yourself that most people don't know about you, we have a tendency, and you know this as a journalist, that oftentimes we anchor people in a moment in time. We hear one thing out of their mouth, or we see one post on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, and we make a judgment call about who they are based on one interaction. And I call that anchoring people in time. And what I love about this question is it gives people this opportunity to see the complexity of our humanity before they hear something that may lead them into that judgment, that anchoring in time, positive or negative, because it goes both ways. So what do you think? What can you share with us?
Well, mine isn't, I feel mine isn't that complex. I was in the movie Ted about the talking teddy bear.
Oh my gosh, I love
With
that.
Mark Wahlberg. Right. If you blink, you may miss it. I was one of the anchors in the very beginning talking about in this town, a teddy bear comes to life. I was me. That was me. Watch it. The first 3 minutes of the film, they have a series of anchors, and I was one of the anchors in it. It was really fun, actually.
So you got to meet Mark Wahlberg, I'm assuming.
You know what? I did it because they did the anchor sets, the news sets on a set. We were in a sound stage. So I didn't get to meet him that day, but I did meet Seth, who was the executive producer. He did The Family Guy. Oh my gosh, I can't believe him. Yes, he's wonderful.
I'm blanking on his last name.
I know, that's terrible. I'm blanking on his name, but I met him. So, and I end up, the producers were wonderful as well. So that was really fun. So I love to throw that out in little trivia.
Yes.
Whatever this
So how does that happen? I mean, because you had to put yourself in a position to have that opportunity come to you. So
Yeah.
what was that?
So what happened was, at the time I was working as a news reporter in an anchor in Boston, Massachusetts, and my contract was ending. And every now and then, these movies will ask, if a movie is filming in your specific town, sometimes they'll ask news people to, oh, can you be in the film? So I had been asked to do something else at one point, and the news director at the time said, no, you can't do it. I wasn't one of the favorite people on the totem pole, but I noticed that they were letting other people do it. So at any rate, my contract was ending, and I knew I was getting to a point where I wanted more freedom, more creative opportunities. So my contract ended. I wasn't going to renew, but I was still in Boston at the time. And the casting agent for extras said, "Hey, weren't you that girl?" She had my email from the last time, and she just emailed me and said, "Hey, you want to try this?" I said, "Sure." That's how it happened. I wouldn't have known about it, but it's just because she remembered me on the news and said, "Hey, we're looking for anchors. Do you want to do it? Are you going to have any problems?" I'm like, "No, because I'm not working right now." And that's how I ended up doing it. It was kind of cool.
I love that. And what happened afterward? I mean, was there anything, did it change anything for you, or did you have any kind of aha moments?
You know, that's a really great question. It didn't change anything in terms of tangible, immediate, because this is what's important, was I was so mired in my own story about where I was going to go next. So I had tunnel vision about what I wanted to do as a local news reporter. So I was going to do my time in these cities. I had bounced all around the country, from Florida to DC to Massachusetts. And then I was going to go to New York. I was going to work for a network. I was going to pitch the show, and I was going to, just do X, Y, and Z. Anyway, that all failed spectacularly. So the nothing materialized at all. And I look back on it because I remember the producers were very kind to me on that film, and they had asked me if I wanted to go to the red carpet. And I said, no, I'm not going to go to the red carpet. I have to do this and this and this. I had some excuse. I don't even remember what I was doing at the time. That's what's so lame. But it was a really great lesson in, you need to take the blinders off, and you need to be careful of the story or the narrative you're telling yourself of what should be, and be open to what is in front of you. And I look back and I just thought, how fun was that I got to be on this set and I got to talk to these producers and I got to witness this. And the aha moment, I think, and it's really in hindsight, is
They usually are.
yes,
Mhm.
yes.
It's pretty rare for you to notice at that pivotal
I
moment.
mean, right? It's so true, but it's really about just looking up, making sure you keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open and grateful for the opportunities. And at the time, I was so frustrated about the doors that weren't opening that I wasn't really looking at the doors that were, even if that was a small crack, it was just
Right. A little bit of window.
it could have been a window, right? But I look back and I try to be more open now when I see
brilliant.
opportunities.
What a
Thank you.
great lesson. I often say that one of my favorite quotes, I'm not somebody who uses quotes in a lot of my work. Again, I'm very practical. Unless it calls me to action, I don't know. But this one calls me to action every time, and it's Mae West. I only regret the things I didn't do.
Yes.
And I think about like when I was a teenager, a young adult, and I'd be at a show and they'd ask for volunteers and I'd be too shy. I'd be too
Yes.
conscious of myself and being embarrassed. And now I look back and I think, man, why didn't I do that? Why was I so self-conscious?
Right. 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 And why are we letting whatever that little thing that if you do get a no, and I have gotten plenty of no's, you let that kind of get into your, self-consciousness. And that seems to have way more weight than it should versus
Way more weight than all the yeses.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
Exactly. Right. That is absolutely right.
I love that you had that lesson from it because I think a lot about that, about how. So I mentioned before we hit record that I'm a Gallup certified strengths finder coach. And one of the talents is achiever. And these are people that are very, very goal oriented. It's in the category called the executing domain. So I describe it as the get shit done domain.
Yes.
And people with that talent have a tendency to be very singularly focused. And oftentimes it takes that moment of missing the target or a significant crash and burn for them to realize that goal was kind of arbitrary.
Yes. Yes. Spot on. That is so true. And I've had reminders along the way that and I still fall into those traps. I mean, so
your brain works.
Yeah, yes, see? And I try to read little things that remind, have that moment of gratitude, champion the little victories of that's why I loved it when we first started talking and you said, what's something that's great that happened today? Just a phone call with a friend. That was great. My friend Whitney, who's going to be listening to this podcast. She loves
mention for Nick's.
Yeah, so Whitney Lou, we have been friends for over 20 years. And but yes, because it's all about perspective. So I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, it's a problem that I have and I have to consistently work on that.
Well, I'm because this language is so innate to me now after working with so many people and teams on it. It's not so much that it becomes a blind spot. And I think the key is knowing that this is still what brings you joy, that you have to feed it, but doing it with more intention. So I talk to my mom about this all the time because she is very athletic. Even she's in her late 70s, super athletic. But she gets into this goal setting where it's not necessarily competing with the other people in the room, but it is, I'm going to do this. And she'll set this arbitrary goal, even if she injures herself, to the point where she'll injure herself.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about when you're going to set a goal, be conscious of the goal.
Yes.
And then review it periodically. Like you can, what you had that tunnel vision of what you wanted, sometimes you have to take a step back and take inventory. Is it still what I want? Is that still the right
Yes.
goal?
Yes.
And because the goals are amazing, and it's part,
Mhm.
I need people like you in my life because I am not motivated at all by goals. That is not the language I speak. Really, I'm all about action. What can I do?
Yeah.
Tell me what to do
Yeah.
and I'll do it.
Yeah.
So I love that you're working on that in a way that still acknowledges that that is your strength.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate you saying that because, I mean, and even hearing you say that, I think, why was I so wedded to that particular goal? I didn't really, but it was just because that's what you're supposed to do. You do this, you do this, you do this. That's what you do. And I look back and I think, in hindsight, though, that's not really what I wanted to do. I wanted to do it because it sounds great to say you work for a network and you're creating this content. It sounds great. But ultimately, I didn't want to be working for anyone else. And I had friends who were working in the network, and there was a lot of some nasty politics they had to deal with.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was not good at that. I just wasn't. That's one thing I can't be fake that way. I really can't. I can be pleasant. I know when to smile and be cordial, but when it comes to sucking up, that was probably one of my biggest downfalls. I could not suck up,
Good.
you know.
I don't know that we would have been friends if that was something that you could do easily. We could be diplomatic, which is very different, and
Yes.
pragmatic.
That's right. That's right.
That's different.
Exactly. Yes.
So
Completely.
you left the network in Boston,
Yes.
and what was the next thing that you did, and what got you there?
Yeah. Well, the next thing I did, I just started freelancing. I started doing, voiceovers for little, organizations that needed someone to narrate something or something like that. And then I started doing a few more freelance projects. And I wasn't finding my niche in Boston. I had come there under the identity or the umbrella of this particular network. And then when that's gone, you kind of feel adrift. So I moved back to DC, Washington, DC, which is where I was originally from. And I had a colleague who knew someone at the Tribune TV station at the time, and they needed someone to help with their specials. They were doing news specials. And so I was doing longer form pieces, which I really enjoyed because I loved being able to not only tell stories, but share information in a way that was informative and helpful. So that was always, yes, exactly. That's when I always felt the most useful when I was a reporter, an anchor. So it was funny. I would have pockets when I would tell these great feature stories, but I was usually the crime and weather person. So I was the crime, or I was standing in the snow telling people not to go out in the snow. That was me. Yeah.
Every time I watch that, I'm like, that's a shitty job.
Yes, right. I was one of those little sacrificial lambs when the rain was coming sideways. I was holding, the microphone and the paper. Um, I just didn't feel like I was very useful, but I did feel like I was making a difference when I would tell a story and give people information about something that was happening with, a property tax bill that was coming up in the state house or something like that. So I started doing these longer form pieces. And what I found interesting was I was finding pockets of uncovered pieces of DC history or just history in general that nobody was really covering. And so I pitched it to the executive director at the time, and he just wasn't interested. He just was. And I kept getting, again, more no's. And finally, another girlfriend of mine said to me, Robin, why don't you just start your own company and find a way to tell these stories yourself? You seem like you're doing all of this work anyway. Why don't you just do it for yourself? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. And she said, well, you're doing a lot of it now. So I went to a little small business incubator and learned how to incorporate, which was just, figuring out how to get a EIN number and all the unglamorous things of starting a business. And that's really how it started. And then I applied for a grant and I started to do films about really women in history. It wasn't, again, my intent, but I started doing films about women in history who were often overlooked, who had these amazing stories to tell, or who did amazing things that continue to inspire me and others today that make a difference. So, for example, in DC, I did a film about Mary Church Terrell, who a lot of people may not know, but she was a turn of the century suffragette. I found out about her because I was working on another assignment, and there is this neighborhood that is growing. It's in LaDroit Park, and it's going through some growing pains because there's some redeveloped houses there. And then there's this one house that looks like an old half house. It's really dilapidated. And I thought, what is going on here? And it's marked as a national site that has to be preserved. It was the original house of this suffragette who, at the time, at the turn of the century, she was a wealthy Black woman, and her house represented a place of intellectual conversation, a place for activism. And from there, she was one of the first people who helped desegregate lunch counters in DC. Now, this house is considered an eyesore by the neighborhood. And I thought, why are people upset about this house? So I decided to do a film about it because I thought, this is a treasure.
If they only knew,
Yes.
right?
Yes, if they only
Let's
knew.
inspire your daughters.
Exactly. And so that's how that film came about. And now it's gotten grant money from the National Historic Preservation Trust. It was on PBS. I gave it to Howard University. They own the house. And so that is their property. That film is now part of their library to help promote preserving this house, which I think down the line will become a museum. So that's why I got into this. And it's nice to be able to talk about it. I get excited about it because sometimes people think, well, who cares about history and who cares? This house is taking down property values. Well, there's actually a big story behind who this woman is and was, and what her house represents, who she represented, and the type of change she promoted in Washington, D.C. So that was how I started down this path, because I would see things and think, hey, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Who was this person?
I love that. I love that. And I just have to tell you, I was born at Columbia Hospital for Women in Washington, D.C. And
That's amazing.
we moved away when I was only 5. And then we lived in Colorado. We lived in L.A. We moved back to Colorado. I finished college in Colorado. And then I moved to D.C. again for a paid internship. And I ended up staying there. And that's where I met my husband. And our first son was born at Columbia Hospital for Women.
Oh,
And
wow.
about 6 months later, we moved to Montana from DC. And a couple months after that, we saw the news that said that Columbia Hospital for Women was shutting down and becoming, I don't know, retail and apartments or something like that. So it was just this little pocket of time where I could have had a child at that hospital. And I just happened to be there. And that hospital happened to be, my doctor was doing her services. And yeah, and I loved it. It was small. It was, I loved that hospital. I love that. That's such a first story.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, in effect, you just told me and our listeners what you do without telling us what you do. You did not tell you the word yet?
You did. Yeah, it's magic, Sarah. It's funny. I so appreciate that, because I'm going to go a little bit off on not a tangent, but off the path for a second. In DC, we were joking about it. DC is one of those places. I have a love-hate with the city for many, many reasons. There's a great culture. There's so much happening here. It's also a place where there are a lot of self-important people. And you're dealing with people throwing around titles and all this. So often being a creative person doesn't make sense. It's not, you're just not. You're on Phil Hill. You're not important. Exactly. And there's a lot of that. So last year I went on a women's retreat where I just wanted to focus and recenter. and we were talking about business and our businesses, and I was saying I was frustrated because my business was not doing as well as I wanted it to. And she said, "Well, tell me about what you do." And so, but she asked it in a way kind of around, not quite as direct, but in a way that you would have, kind of massaging it out of me, not having me, not the traditional. So, what do you do?
Right. I hate that question.
I hate, right. And later on down the line, she was asking me about some event, like, why don't you feel good about what I do? Because I had told her some story. And in relaying the story, I was totally downplaying what I did. I was totally making myself small. I was kind of dismissing. And anyway, to make a long story short, I was talking to some guy who was a politician on Capitol Hill, a big name, and he was asking me if I was anyone important. And I just kind of said, well, I used to work for a TV station, but I don't really do that anymore. And now I do this. And I gave me some kind of like,
Heartbroken already.
yes. And he ended the conversation saying, so basically you do nothing. And I was like, oh. And I told this story to this woman, and she said, you did that to yourself, right?
You
And
absolutely.
so I was like, wow, I just got sucker punched twice. I said, can I just take a minute for me? And she said, no, you need to think about how you are telling your story. You need to think about what you are saying to people. And the way you present that is a mirror of how you feel about it. And it silenced me. It silenced me. I did not expect her to say that, but it was tough love I needed to hear.
She's absolutely right. I've had the same conversation with a woman who for many, many years was a Mary Kay professional. And she would say, oh, well, I help women live the life of their dreams or whatever, so making yourself small. And I'm like, no. You give these women the tools to be successful. You're training them. You're building their confidence. It's so much more. And if you talk about it that way, how do you expect them to talk about it?
That's right. That's right. That's right. And it's, and it's a fine line because between the bottom line of what your company looks like too, and how you feel about it. So, my films, it's not a financially lucrative endeavor. I love what I do, but my films are on PBS, and that's great. I'm happy about it, but it's not a lucrative endeavor. And so often you tie what you're making with the value. And it's horrible.
I know.
It's
such a
horrible
mistake
thing to do. It is such a mistake. And I know there are realities of financial realities in life. I'm not diminishing that by any means, but you have to be careful with that.
Yeah. I had a similar tough love moment with a friend who I was in a similar boat where I was like, I just don't know why, I don't have the success that I want in my business.
Yes.
And she said,
right.
Well, what does success look like to you? And I said, well, I need to be making whatever money.
Right.
And she said, is that all? Is that what you're associating with success, is income? What does success feel like?
Yeah.
And then I think one of the most important aspects of what I do with my clients is I have them tell the stories of their successes, and it has zero to do with their income. It's tell me about that last client you worked with. Tell me about the impact. Show me the email testimonial that you got as a result of that work. You're changing lives. You are bringing forward stories that are inspiring especially young Black women. We're like, oh my gosh, this is in my neighborhood? This woman grew up where I'm growing up?
Yeah.
I could do that?
Yeah.
Right? there's so much more than how much you make.
But let me ask you this. Let me play devil's advocate, because this is like the little nice angel, bad angel. Well, I'm not on shoulders, right? So what is it when I always felt that when your talents can support you and sustain you in the way you want them to, that is what I believe success to be. It's kind of like that quote. Did you see that movie Moneyball with right, years ago? But there's a great quote where they said it's not about the money, it's what the money represents. And that's the hardest thing for me is it's about what it represents. And so how do you feel when you have a talent and a passion for something? And for me, it's this storytelling and it's creating, my company around Robin and all that. And then that talent doesn't sustain you. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you have to find a way to value yourself more. I think it's a matter of how we value ourselves. So, for instance, 5 years ago, it's hard in Montana.
Yeah.
Salaries are not keeping up with the cost of living at all. They're just being, our state is now the least affordable place to live in the country. Not because the housing is so expensive, which it is compared to what it was just a few years ago. 2020 just wiped out our housing. And the cost to buy a house now is probably triple what it was just a few years ago. But it's not just that, it's that our salaries don't keep up. So state employees have not gotten a cost of living raise this year. So how even state employees can't afford to live in the state capital because the rent has just skyrocketed. People are buying these properties, and when they buy them at these rates, their mortgages are higher, so they have to raise the rent double, triple because they just bought the property. And you have to pay your mortgage or pay this charity and not an investment.
Correct.
So what I noticed, especially about 5 years ago when I was really just getting started with what I'm doing now, I would offer a coaching session for $100. And I know my expertise is worth a lot more than that.
Way more.
Especially anywhere outside of Montana.
Absolutely.
So that frustration is for real. And one of the things I had to acknowledge for myself was that I was undervaluing my skills.
Yeah.
And it ended up that a lot of my clients are not in the state of Montana because my clients in Montana, they don't value what I do like the people in Washington, D.C. do.
Yes.
So they just don't get it. And I have to make enough income from my clients outside of Montana to be able to serve the people who really can't afford me in Montana.
Yeah.
So I think that's the only way to make that work is to start to understand your own value.
Yes.
How do I pay myself enough?
And deeply believe that you are worth it. Yes.
Absolutely. And it takes time. I know people who charge right out the gate without having earned that. Coaches who start up and their startup fees are in the couple $100s a session. And I just would not have felt comfortable with that until I felt like I was providing
That's right.
real value.
Absolutely.
And maybe at some point I was definitely undervaluing myself despite
Yes.
or because of that. But at the same time, it's I think it's really a matter of looking around you. What is the service you're providing? What stories are coming back to you?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a client that says, you changed my life in the first 10 minutes of our conversation, okay, I'm worth it. Yes. And maybe I'm undervaluing myself.
Yes. I totally get that. That is so
kind of.
It does. And, it takes me back to, again, when negative voices get in our heads about how we should value ourselves. And I say this hopefully to inspire other listeners to never, ever let this get in your head. I remember when I was first starting out as a reporter, and I had already had one job under my belt and I had a graduate degree. So I wasn't like completely new, but I was interviewing in another small market, like a small medium market. I'll just say it was Kentucky. And I was interviewing with this woman, and I had looked up what salaries were, and I had included what my graduate degree, my experience, and so of course she pulled out so what's your salary expectation? And I gave a figure which was commensurate with what other reporters were making, etc. And she said, "Well, don't we think a lot of ourselves?" And I just thought,
Yeah.
wow. You know what? And I wish
And I think you should too.
yeah. And I was so stunned. But then after that, I was going through, and you know what? And
Did you get the job?
they did offer me the job at $20,000 less than the figure. I did not take it. I did not take it. And I ended up getting a freelance position in DC instead. A much better place, much better position, much better for me. But
did you have that moment of, oh, maybe she's right? Of course you
did.
Of course you did.
I did. And that's what's disgusting is I had that moment of maybe she's right. Maybe, and it's the lingering vapors of that sometimes when I try to negotiate for myself every now and then, you get kind of like, oh, who do you think you are? And instead of having I'm starting to have I'm me. I'm me.
I know exactly who I am.
I know exactly who I am. And I think I got to tell you, the biggest aha moment was when I had done a couple of films by this point. I had a couple of films under my belt, and I was in a number of film festivals, and I would, go on panels and speak. And what I noticed is that so often I would be on these panels. I would often be the only woman. I'd be the only woman of color. Often my topics are about, again, just about people who are overlooked in history. And so often I would hear these men talk about things and they didn't have the background that I had. And finally later on, someone asked me, do you have imposter syndrome? And I finally said, I used to, and now I don't anymore.
Standing ovation for that.
Thank you. Because I can tell you, I don't care if, what you've done and whose granddad got you that camera or whatever. It's like, no one can take away the experience that I've had from scrapping from the bottom to the top, whether it's when I started as a camera person in a newsroom, pushing a camera across a studio, to becoming a reporter, to starting my own production company. Nobody can take that away from me. Like, I went literally from the bottom, started at the ground. And I'm not saying that I'm all that. I'm not. But I'm just saying there's something to be said. Well, thank you. Thank you. But there's something to be said for experience and paying your dues and like doing it legitimately and struggle.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have to earn it. And
you earned it. Right.
Too many people don't. They feel entitled to whatever they get because that's how they were raised, or they think they shouldn't have to. And
yes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I treasure the struggle. I look back at the time I didn't. Now, going through college and working my way through school and graduating at 98 pounds because I didn't have enough money to eat.
Oh my God.
I was paying my rent instead of food. I mean, and I look back and I think, thank goodness I went through that, because I was scrappy. Like, I know what I've been through.
Absolutely. I know what I've been through. And that's what made me laugh. Was someone, I had done a film about Fannie Lou Hamer, the civil rights activist. And I had never done a film before, and I was getting rejected from all these grants. And I finally got one grant, the Sam Rubin Foundation. They gave me one grant for $5,000, and I was so grateful. I made that grant stretch like nobody's business.
Yes, you did.
And as someone had mentioned not that long ago about how they did a film and they got they got $150,000. And I said, I have never, ever had that type of luxury.
Not yet.
And so, thank you. Not yet. And so to have the struggle, as you say, it does mean something. It does.
She's scrappy.
Yeah, it makes you scrappy.
And I think that's great. It makes us moist, and it also makes us appreciate things more about what we've been through, what we can do. He tests you.
It does.
Yeah. I like to think of it as evidence.
Yes.
When we're about to go do something that's really scary, stretchy, and we can look back at all that evidence and go, I have a pile of evidence that I can do this. I've done harder. And you're just looking at this growing pile of evidence.
Yes. Yes. I like calling it evidence. That's lovely. Yeah. It makes it tangible almost,
It does. And you start collecting that. This is why collecting your stories is so important, because your stories are your evidence.
Yes.
And when you start collecting the stories, then when you have that one naysayer that takes an outsized place in your heart and brain, you can say, wait a minute, I have 100 conflicting reports here. Why am I listening to this one guy?
Yes, completely. I like that. Yeah. Thank you. You're good at what you do.
Oh, thank you. So let's make sure that our listeners know where to reach you, how to follow you, what they can do to support you in the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, you can go to my website, aroundrobin.com, and I'd love you to subscribe. You can see my films. I have access to, I've done 5 documentary films and a profile on this great woman in DC who created Ben's Chili Bowl. I don't even know if you remember. Do you know Ben's Chili Bowl?
That sounds really familiar.
It's famous in downtown DC, but I'd love people to subscribe, and you have access to all of my films. You can watch them anytime that you want. So aroundrobin.com /films, and you'll be able to do that. And I'm also on Instagram @around_Robin. So I would love that. But thank you for this opportunity and to talk to you. I mean, I have so many more questions and so many more things I would love to talk to you about. You're really providing a wonderful space for people to be able to share their stories and really reconfigure what they tell themselves and how, and what a shift that can make in their lives.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for your time. And listeners, just so you know, you don't have to pause and run over and grab a piece of paper or pick up your phone. These links will be in the show notes associated with this episode at elkinsconsulting.com. So you'll be able to find out more about Robin at that website.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Just out of curiosity, is having this podcast what you thought it would be?
So I'm not an achiever. I don't know if I mentioned that before.
I don't say that.
I don't usually think about what the objectives are necessarily. I just kind of go with whatever lands in my life.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
My 300th episode the title was An Accidental Podcaster Hits 300 Episodes. So I never know what's coming my way, and I just take the things that I want to. I think it's really important not to take all of the opportunities just because they happen to find you. I do that. I take my inventory. Is this still what I want to be doing?
Yes.
Is this in alignment with what I want to spend my time doing now?
Yes.
Maybe it was a week ago. Maybe it will be in 6 months, but is it where I want to spend my time now?
Wow. That's very healthy and a holistic approach to living and being in the moment and being present. That's really lovely. And it allows you to have more joy in what you're doing versus, well, I'll do this when I.
Yeah. I think I mentioned that, the Mae West quote, I only regret the things I didn't do.
Yes.
I think about that a lot. Anytime something comes up that I think, will I regret not doing this? Especially when it comes to spending time with my mom or our 2 boys that are 26 and 23 now.
Wow.
I'm very conscious of not wanting to regret.
Yes. Which is way to live life.
It is.
No regrets.
Gets in my way sometimes, but that's a whole other story. But thank you, Robin. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure has been mine. This was a total treat. Thank you for this.
Listeners, it's your turn. One thing that really caught my attention was the story of the woman that was interviewing Robin and said, well, we think much of ourselves, don't we? When do you get to be the woman that says, damn, girl, you really know what your value is? We have this range in our salary, and that's at the upper range. I can try to push this through, but what if we start here? When can you be the woman that says, you're right? You aren't asking enough. We need to be that woman for the women around us. It should never be a woman who tells another woman that she's not the value that she thinks she is. So I'm going to leave this with you in the hopes that whether you are a man or a woman, you choose to support the people around you rather than tear them down. Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Thanks for listening.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.